Epilogue. The moon was high in the sky, and somewhere in the distance an owl hooting could just be heard. The grounds in front of Kennerlot High School were absolutely still, save for the young man sitting on the front steps, his head down to stare at a collection of photographs held in his hands. It had been a few hours since Bibi passed through the portal at this point, and everyone else had returned to their respective homes long ago. Sunset had been the first to depart, leaving the friends and family of Bibi to their privacy. Scootaloo had gone next, seemingly uncomfortable with the depressing atmosphere. Sweetie and Applebloom followed soon after, leaving together in an attempt to comfort one another. Fluttershy had stuck around the longest, sitting with Eventide for almost an entire hour after he went back to his car and retrieved the photos. He had brought along a copy of every single picture of Bibi he had ever taken. Fluttershy had asked about a few of the ones she hadn't seen before, and the two had talked in whispers for quite some time before the animal enthusiast had to head home herself. Now, Eventide was all alone. He flipped through the top photo to the bottom of the stack, finding himself at the beginning all over again. His eyes lingered on the picture. A photo of Bibi sleeping soundly in Fluttershy's lap. He'd still been living in the old house back then. As he thought back to it, a rush of memories came over him, and he was not able to stop that sad sigh that slipped out of him.
How are you feeling?
Eventide jumped, startled, and looked up. To his surprise, Fluttershy stood not far away, her hands clasped behind her back and a worried look on her face. "What? Fluttershy?" he asked in a croak before clearing his throat. "What are you doing here? I thought you were going home to get some sleep." Fluttershy looked down, idly brushing her foot along the pavement.
"I couldn't sleep. I remembered how upset you were when I left, so I thought I'd come back and check on you."
"How did you even know I'd still be here?" She smiled at him and walked over. She sat down next to him on the steps, her eyes glued on the portal.
"I didn't, but I figured you probably would be,"
she explained, before glancing sideways at him.
"I know how long things can take with you, sometimes."
Eventide managed a snort of amusement at that before shaking his head. "Fair enough, I suppose," he grumbled before his own eyes settled on the portal. "Well, to answer your question, I feel like garbage." Fluttershy hummed, leaning into his side.
"I'm sorry. Is there anything I can do?"
Eventide sighed. "I don't know. Just sit with me for a while, I guess. I could use some company right now," he explained quietly, subconsciously draping an arm over her shoulders to pull her closer.
"Okay. I can do that."
The two fell into a long, companionable silence after that. Fluttershy looked up into the night sky, her eyes catching sight of the moon, half full, snaking its way across the heavens. Eventide, meanwhile, kept his eyes trained intently on the portal, his mind wandering. "I'm gonna miss him," he suddenly stated, making Fluttershy look down at him again. His eyes were starting to mist over, and the beginnings of emotional tremors could be felt in his body. She sighed and pressed herself into his side a little more.
"I know. I'm going to miss him too."
When I go home, he isn't going to be with me. I'm going to wake up in the morning and he won't be down in the basement waiting for me to hug him for breakfast. He won't be playing with Buddha or napping with her on the chair or the couch and... He rambled on, the trembling in his voice getting worse the more he went. Fluttershy suddenly leaned away from him, using her hand to lightly grab his chin and turn it to face her. She looked into his eyes for several long seconds, her expression unreadable.
Eventide,
She whispered before reaching behind her with her other hand. Fluttershy? Suddenly, she leaned back and brought her hand forward, revealing a thick, leather-bound book. It had a symbol of a black heart with a green glow surrounding it emblazoned on the front cover, and a honeycomb pattern around the outer edges. She presented it to him, a warm smile spreading on her face.
here.
Eventide blinked, confused. What is it? He asked, reaching out and lightly taking the book in his hands. It was heavier than he was expecting, and he could tell that it was handmade. He turned it over, studying it, before opening it up to examine the contents. To his surprise, every page was blank.
I asked Sunset to get it made before you and BB went through the first time.
Fluttershy explained softly, and Eventide's mind briefly wandered back to that day. He did recall seeing Fluttershy talking to Sunset in hushed voices as he had pulled up in the car.
I would have gotten it to you earlier, but they took a while to make, and I had to wait for the other one.
What do you mean, other one? Eventide asked, baffled at this turn of events. But then a memory came to him of Sunset Shimmer writing into a journal much like this one, and replies magically appearing on the pages. His eyes went wide as the realization clicked into place, and his jaw fell open. Wait, Fluttershy, is this? She reached out into her pocket and withdrew a small, ballpoint pen. She held it out to him and smiled.
Say hello.
Eventide stared at the pen for several seconds, his brain trying to catch up, and his heart daring to hope. Hesitantly, he took the pen in his hand and turned back to the first page, finding it just as empty as all the others. He licked his suddenly dry lips and put the pen to the parchment, slowly writing out a simple message. Hello? BB? Several seconds passed in silence. And then the page lit up with a gentle light, a response writing itself out below what he had written. His eyes widened, recognizing that horn writing anywhere.
Dad?
Eventide just stared for a second, blinking a few times to see if what he was staring at was a hallucination. But it wasn't. The word remained on the page, staring back at him as proof. Fluttershy, He choked out, a whole new wave of tears rolling down his cheeks. With a strangled sound, something between an overjoyed laugh and a sob, he threw himself against her, pulling her into a bone-crushing hug. He buried his face into her shoulder, weeping tears of joy. Thank you. Thank you. Fluttershy didn't say anything. She merely returned the hug as tight as she could, a serene smile on her lips. After a few seconds, Eventide pulled back, smiling at her. He then reached down and picked up the book and pen. He sniffled, wiped a hand over his eyes to dispel his tears, and got to writing. All the while, Fluttershy rested comfortably against his side, her eyes trained on the page. And that was how they stayed for a long time. The young man and his childhood friend sat together on the front steps of the school they had shared when they were young, talking to the child from another world that they had raised together. And they were happy.